There is a particular exhaustion that comes from a life built almost entirely around other people's comfort. It is not the exhaustion of doing too much, although that is part of it. It is the exhaustion of consistently doing things you didn't want to do, for people who never asked whether you wanted to, because somewhere deep in your psychology saying no stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a risk you couldn't afford to take. And the person living inside this pattern almost never describes it as a problem with saying no. They describe it as caring about people, as not wanting to let anyone down, as being the kind of person who shows up. And all of those things are true. But underneath them, and older than them, is a nervous system that learned very specifically that keeping other people comfortable was the safest available strategy, and that the discomfort of refusal was a cost they could not absorb without consequences. Psychology does not classify this as a personality type. It classifies it as a learned behavioral pattern, one with identifiable origins, identifiable mechanisms, and a very specific set of costs that accumulate over time in the person who carries it. Understanding it does not mean becoming someone who refuses things carelessly. It means understanding why the word no became, somewhere along the way, one of the most difficult words in your vocabulary. The pattern almost always begins in early relational experience, not necessarily in dramatic or obviously difficult households. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the subtle emotional arithmetic of a family where harmony requires management, where the feelings of certain people carried more weight than others, where the child learned not through instruction, but through the specific feedback of repeated experience, that the emotional weather of the adults around them was something they had influence over, and that influence felt, at first, like power, and later felt like responsibility, and finally, it felt like an obligation. Psychologists call this fawn response, a term developed by therapist Pete Walker, to describe a survival adaptation that sits alongside the more well-known fight, flight, and freeze responses. Where those responses manage threat through confrontation, escape, or paralysis, the fawn response manages it through appeasement, through making the potential source of discomfort comfortable, through becoming so attuned to what others need that the question of what you yourself need becomes genuinely difficult to access. The fawn response is not weakness. It is the intelligent adaptation of a person who learned that their safety was relational, that the quality of their environment depended on the emotional states of the people in it, and that those emotional states could be influenced by making themselves agreeable, useful, and easy to be around. If this is landing somewhere real for you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if understanding the deeper psychology behind patterns you've been living with is something you want more of, subscribing makes that work possible. Because the adult version of this adaptation shows up in several specific, recognizable ways that are worth examining individually, not to identify flaws, but to trace each behavior back to where it was originally built and what it was originally for. The first is the near physical sensation that accompanies the prospect of refusal. It is not simply reluctance. It is something that activates in the body a tightening, an anxiety, a specific quality of dread that arrives before the no has even been spoken. This physical response is the nervous system implementing a protection that was installed before the current situation existed. The anticipated discomfort of the person being refused, the imagined withdrawal of warmth, the feared consequence of having disappointed someone who matters. The body has learned to treat the prospect of saying no as a threat signal, not metaphorically, but neurologically, and it responds accordingly. And because the body's response is immediate and the reasoning about why it's disproportionate takes longer, the no gets swallowed before it fully forms. The second is the instant reframing that makes the yes feel chosen. This is the most invisible part of the pattern. The request arrives, the reluctance activates, and almost simultaneously the mind generates reasons why saying yes is actually fine, actually what you want, actually the right thing to do. The reframing is so automatic and so convincing that the person often genuinely believes, by the time they agree, that they agreed freely. They don't experience the yes as a concession. They experience it as a preference. And this is what makes the pattern so difficult to observe. From the inside, the compliance has been converted into apparent choice before it even reaches conscious awareness. The third is the accumulation of resentment that has no visible origin. Because each individual yes was reframed as chosen, the person cannot quite account for the exhaustion and the low-grade bitterness that builds over time. They are doing what they want. They are helping people they care about. And yet something is quietly depleting in a way they cannot point to or explain. The resentment has no clear target because the awareness that a no was suppressed never fully surfaced. The body keeps the account even when the mind does not. The fourth is the specific difficulty with reciprocity. The person who cannot say no tends, as a direct consequence, to have great difficulty asking for things. The behavioral pattern is coherent and internally consistent. If the function of agreeableness is to maintain the quality of a relationship, then making requests which risk refusal, which risk disappointment, which risk producing a negative emotional state in the other person, is structurally incompatible with the strategy. You cannot be the one who causes discomfort if your entire relational model is built on preventing it. And so, the person who gives most generously is often the person who receives least comfortably, not from lack of desire, but from the impossibility of asking, without violating the logic of their own system. Here is the paradox that lives at the center of all of this. The person who cannot say no appears to everyone around them as someone who is extraordinarily generous, and the generosity is real. But it is frequently operating in the absence of choice, and generosity without choice is not virtue. It is self-abandonment dressed in virtue's clothing. And the people who are closest to someone with this pattern, who benefit most from their perpetual availability, are often the ones least aware that what they are receiving is not freely given, because it looks free. Because the person giving it has become so skilled at making it look free that they have sometimes convinced themselves. The pattern is not a permanent feature of who this person is. It is a response to what they learned about what they needed to be in order to be safe and loved in the specific relational environments that shaped them. And learning can be updated, not through discipline or willpower or forcing no out in situations where the body is resisting, but through the slower, more patient work of developing a relationship with the self in which the self's needs are treated as real and legitimate and worth the discomfort of expression. Saying no is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is a relationship with other people that is built on what you actually want to give, rather than on what you feel you cannot afford to withhold. That relationship starts with the recognition that the yes you offer has been costing you something, and that the cost has been real, even when it was invisible. You were not wrong to become someone who takes care of people. You were responding to what the world taught you it required. The question worth sitting with now is whether what the world requires then is what your current life actually needs from you. Think about the last time you said yes when your whole body was saying no, and what do you think would have happened if you'd said it anyway? Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.